Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to be going through some hacks, tips and tricks to get the most out of your early wipe gameplay, so stick around and let's get going. So if you're anything like me, the wipe came at a really bad time, which meant that I couldn't play as much as I'd liked. And so for all of us who aren't full time, we need to find ways to be more efficient with our raids. And the first thing that I want to talk about is about stash space and optimizing that, because even though I do have EOD, I did not have EOD for the first two wipes. And so there are definitely some tips and tricks that you should take away to maximize the amount of storage space that you have. This is even more important this wipe because the flea market is at level 20, which takes 5 times as long as getting to level 10, as I described in my last video. And so we really need to be careful about how much stuff we're storing because we're trying to hoard stuff for 5 times the length of time as we were in previous wipes. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is fence. And if you go through his inventory, you'll notice that he's got lots of weapons, which are just the red base components for a lot of these guns. And the reason for this is the durability changes in this wipe mean that a lot of them, when you start off with a scav weapon, you end up with a durability between 45 and 55. And at the lower durability levels, the other traders will not actually buy these guns. And so what this means is that if you've got a scav gun and you're wanting to sell it, it might immediately not look like you can sell it to any trader other than fence. But what you should be doing is you should be disassembling the weapon, selling all of the parts to other traders, preferably mechanic because he pays the most money, but you might want to get trader rep up with other traders, and then selling the base component back to fence. And that's why you see so many of these on here, because this is what other people are doing. Just sell the base part back to fence and all the other pieces go to the other traders, because only this base component, which for traditional guns is the lower receiver, only the base component has durability. So if you removed this, added another one, and then added all the parts back on again, you'll have a 100% durability weapon if you have a 100% durability base, because none of the other components have durability. So there's just one point to note about this and being efficient. Make sure that you do actually disassemble your weapons and sell them in pieces to other traders, and then only sell the last part to fence, because he really does rip you off. So now that we know how to sell our guns efficiently, we want to be able to store our weapons efficiently too, because we don't always just want to sell everything. We're going to use this new sorting table functionality just to showcase this. So imagine we have an M4. Now the way that we can collapse this down and make it take less space is if you take off the magazine and you take off the pistol grip, then what this does is it folds the gun down into one slot instead. And so you can see already we've saved 2 squares. Now the beauty about this is that if you're using base weapons and you've got AKs with the stock pistol grip or M4s with the stock pistol grip and magazines, for example, these mags can just be bought back easily. And the same thing with the pistol grips. You don't actually need to keep these at all. And then you're just left with this weapon, which you can't buy right at the beginning and is actually much more valuable, but now it only takes up 5 slots. So you can fit twice as many into your stash as you could before. This is going to be second nature for many of you, especially if you've played another wipe, but I think it's worth reiterating for the new players, and there's a few examples of where this works. So for example, the MP5, this gets stolen a lot on insurance, you don't get it back, because if you take the magazine out, this ends up being only 4 slots, and this is the suppressed version, because the pistol grip doesn't block it out into 2 slots. So that's just one to bear in mind. So another reason why the MP7 gets stolen all the time is because that has a collapsible stock, and without the suppressor, it basically ends up as 2 slots, which is insane and fits in most people's rigs, which is why you almost never get MP7s back. So some guns you kind of have to think about it a bit more carefully. They're easier to take, and so you're more likely to lose them on insurance. The next thing I want to talk about is our early game goals. The next thing that you should really be going for in kind of the medium term is this Lucky Scav Junkbox. Now, because of the flea market change, you're going to be wanting to keep so many items, and this thing just gives you an incredible amount of space to keep all the junk that you might need for everything. And it's hard to keep track of it all, so if you can just keep everything, then that's an absolutely fantastic thing. Now, Battlestate have just recently changed this so that it's back on Therapist level 1, and it now is only 1.1 million rubles, which does sound quite a lot, but it definitely is worth it for being able to keep all this stuff. And especially if you're on a standard account, this Scav Junkbox storage space is absolutely invaluable. Like, I was on standard for 2 wipes. I know how difficult it can be. I ended up going with EOD, and even with an EOD stash, I have lots of stuff in it. So I cannot overestimate how great this thing is for you. And it's definitely worth the 1.1 mil while you're making your way to the flea market, so you can keep everything. Now, before you get there, you're going to want some other kind of storage solutions, and there are other ways of doing things. So some of the basic stuff, as you can still see, I've got the Lucky Scav Junkbox, and I'm still doing this as well, is something like the bank robber rig, which is very cheap. You end up picking up a bunch of times, and you can see here, it takes up 2 times 3, so it takes up 6 slots, and inside it has 8. So for every single one of these that you use, you get an extra 2 squares. Now, I'm not really min-maxing this. I'm just kind of dynamically using it as I pick up stuff. So you can see on this one, this is a 3x3, but it's in fact a 4x4 on the inside. So this is pretty neat. The CSA is like a bank robber, except it has 2 extra slots. So I'm just kind of picking these up and replacing them as and when. Same thing for the Azimuth. This is absolutely enormous rig. And some are better than others, but you're not really going to be spending all your money like buying these rigs. So basically, just as you pick them up off scavs, put them in here. As you end up moving items around, or if you get the Lucky Scav Junkbox, then start running them as rigs afterwards, right? There's not really much min-maxing going on here, but if you end up full of space and you have an extra CSA and you have a bank robber here, what I'm tending to do is move these items out, move over into the CSA instead, so I get 2 extra slots, and then use the bank robber in the next raid, something like that. So just trying to bear in mind what's most efficient and trying to maximize the space within your hideout by using these rigs before you get the Scav Junkbox, and even after if you're an epic hoarder like me. Okay, next thing, we're going to highlight some particular barters with some of the traders. Now, I actually don't use the barters that much. I probably should use them more, but there's a couple that are really, really useful. The first one I'm going to point out is the tool set. This is basically used for farming part 1 for mechanic. When you get that quest, you can barter it in for all of these pieces. None of them are particularly valuable on their own. You need to get 2 of them, and there's not really another way of getting them early on. So this is fantastic for completing that particular quest. Another barter that they've added, which is absolutely fantastic, is these two. The Magpul M-Lock 2.5-inch rail and the Magpul M-Lock 4.1-inch rail. Now, this used to be a real pain and basically stopped you from modding ARs completely, because a lot of the handguards that you get, especially early on, require these rails before you can attach anything. And now that they've added this, firstly for the USB, and this one with the M-tape, these 2 items were pretty much useless. Were used for some very specific barters, but nothing that was actually any good. And now this gives a good use to these items that you can often find and are quite plentiful. So this allows you to mod some weapons early without having to wait until you're a much higher trade level to be able to do it and have all these parts just sitting in your stash not doing anything. The next one I want to mention is if you want to get some good 545 ammo from Prapor, you can actually barter it for 2 cans of Tushonka, and these are fairly readily available depending on where you go, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. I still think the best round in the game, early wipe, is probably 7.62 PS. But BT is really, really decent. If you can get enough of these, you can actually lace in some decent rounds into your 545 weapons and use those, because they're a lot more plentiful than the 7.62s early on. So this is one to bear in mind and is actually pretty handy. One other thing we should note before we move off from Prapor is that if you buy the AKS-74U from him, you have to complete his first quest to buy it in cash, but this gives you a 30-round magazine of BP rounds, which are 1 step lower than BT, but early wipe they should set you in good stead and will provide decent value. So if you're going to buy this gun anyway, you basically get a 30-round magazine of okay ammo for free. Next, I want to touch briefly on scopes. Now, these are really hard to come by early on, and there's not that many ways to do it, but one of the best early game scopes to get is the Zenit Beloma PSO, and what does this fit on? Well, the answer is not very much, to be honest. You need a dovetail rail, and this is where Jaeger comes in again. So once you've done Mechanics Quest to find Jaeger, you can go and buy this Beach SKS, the OP SKS hunting version. It does actually need to have this mount on, the OP SKS dovetail mount, to attach it, but then this allows you to have a PSO, and a PSO is actually really, really strong early game, just because not many people have that many scopes, and that's actually been greatly enhanced with the flea market push out, because even now I can't buy Alcans and that kind of thing. It's very, very difficult. So a PSO will set you in good stead. Just remember that you might be a little susceptible to short range fire, so it's really useful if you're in a group with other people, and some people go short range, some people go long range, because then you kind of have capacity to do both. That being said, I think probably the best all-round gun early wipe is probably the VPO 136 7.62 carbine, because it fires PS rounds, as I said before, which are very, very good. And the thing is that now they've changed a lot of stuff about the tier 1 traders. You could do all kinds of things. So if we go and look at the edit of the preset for this, you can now buy 30-round magazines. The pistol grip is fine. The stock is fine. You can get the cover, the Bastion cover. Obviously, you always need to take off this. You put the Bastion cover on. You can also buy the MRS from Skier as well. So if we pop that on, then from Prapor, you're going to want to grab the AK-100 handguard, because this is the only handguard that you can buy early game, which has a rail underneath. On this, you're going to be able to add the RK6, which again comes from Skier. And then on the side, you can add the laser. I usually go for the tactical blue. This is the one that I always use. It helps me shoot at short ranges, and I find it's really quite handy. But you don't necessarily need to have this. And this is basically the best gun that you can make early wipe without leveling up any traders and without using the flea or without finding any parts. And it's honestly not too bad. Like, it's 46 ergo and 114 recoil on semi-auto. By the way, if you wanted to spend a little bit more, you can go for something a bit better. I'm using the Delta Point quite a lot, because the Delta Point is available at Peacekeeper level 1 and is for dollars, and you don't really have that much use for dollars early on, and it gets you rating up with Peacekeeper. And I think the Delta Point is a way better scope than the MRS, so that's just something to bear in mind. But I hear you say, this is only semi-auto. Well, I have a trick for you. It does rely on getting the hideout upgraded slightly, and if we go into the hideout, we can go to the workbench, which you will need bolts and screws and a multi-tool, which can be bought from Mechanic, so you don't need to find that, you just buy that from him directly. But within the workbench, as you can see, you can make AKMs using one of these Vepers that we just bought or just looked for on Skier, another multi-tool from Mr. Mechanic, and then again from Mechanic you buy an AKM compensator. And so using these three, you can effectively convert this Vepr into a full auto AKM. Now, the way that you do this is that you have to get the generator up, you have to put a piece of fuel in here, and then you can run the workbench without fuel by turning the generator on, starting the craft, turning the generator back off again. And yes, it does take a long time, but given you're not going to be making too much else in here for the time being without being able to sell this stuff on the flea, then you may as well just keep it going. If you've got fuel to spare, you can turn the generator on and make this time much, much shorter. But to be honest with you, unless you really, really are desperate for the AKs, I'm just kind of saving my fuel for the time being and just letting it just tick over in the background and just give me a full auto AKM every now and then. Job's a good one. The next thing we're going to be talking about is quests. Do not be afraid to use the wiki to look up the solutions to these quests. They are obscure, they are very, very confusing, and every wipe I end up looking up some of the quests as well, even though I've done them 4 or 5 times, because by the time I get to the end of the wipe, I've forgotten what they were when I go back 6 months later and try to do them again, and some of them, as I said, are very obscure. Now, early on, some of the biggest blockers are keys and some food items, and so very broadly, I would recommend running jackets to get keys. Customs dorms is the best way, in my opinion, and I've been running that as a scav because you turn up when PMC is already gone, people have different things to do. Hardly ever do I actually find the jackets looted. Most of the time the keys are still in there, and so it's a really, really quick and easy way of using your scav to be able to then push your PMC forwards. And I found a ton of keys in these jackets. I think it's really, really great. Just bringing up the map quickly, you can see the 3-story dorms on the left and the 2-story dorms on the right. And a really quick run is basically run into the bottom section, 101 over here, grab the 2 there, 104 over here, then sneak up into the 2nd story. There's 2 in this room, 2 in this room, and then 2 on the floor over in this room, and then up into the top story, 2 over here, 2 in the cupboard on this side, and then out. And then over into the 2nd floor. You can go in either way, either through the 2-story up here, because you can't actually get in through the ground floor, and this is all blocked off over here too. So you can either go in from the top, go into the showers and 211 for 4, 202, then down the stairs into 108 for the 2 at the back here, and then leave. And this is honestly the best. There's so many jackets in here. It's the best way to get keys. I'm still running it for some because there are some serious blockers which are a real pain, and so this is really the only way you're going to be able to get keys reliably, because otherwise it's going to take a long time sometimes for certain keys to spawn. The bunkhouse key in particular is one that I'm still stuck on. I've done this run a bunch of times and I'm still yet to get that key. It's very painful. Same sometimes can be had with the customs office key and a few others. But those ones, at least there are now new barters for them. Just to give you a reference of what I'm talking about there, if you go to the barter items here, you can get the office key for a bunch of different food items and the dorms 206 key for a pile of meds. I still need to make this one work as well, and so hitting the medical loot camp on woods can be a good idea. Speaking of woods, there's tons of quests at the beginning that require food items such as the notorious croutons for Jaeger, and I found that the best way by far to go and get this stuff is go onto woods and up into the villages, especially this one by the bridge extract, and there's so many food item spawns within this area, it's unreal. They're actually mostly loose on the tables, so you just have to look around and make sure that you get them, and this is really good actually, even for industrial loot. And I've used this woods run as a scav and as a PMC quite a lot, even just getting stuff for the hideout, because there's all sorts of toolboxes and things in this area too. So there's actually quite a decent amount of stuff over here. So check it out, and hopefully that will help out. Finally, let's go through some more specifics about certain quests that can be a real pain. Not that I need to do a full quest guide because they are out there, but just as a quick overview, debut is really not that bad because you need to kill scavs on customs, which is not too hard, but you also need the MP133s. And so the way that you should fix this is that rather than going and finding them, you should try and go through mechanic instead and start introduction, which gives you Jaeger's acquaintance quest, which once you have Jaeger, you can buy the MP133s from him. So that kind of short circuits this a little bit. The rest of Prapor's questline is actually fairly straightforward, except for delivery from the past, which you need the Tarkov office key for, which can be a bit of a blocker, and that's why I mentioned the jacket runs earlier, and there is also that barter trade for it. But outside of this, even though some of them can be a little bit hairy, most of them you just have to go somewhere and do something. So it's not too bad until you get to ice cream cones where you have to deliver 60 round magazines. So at least this first section is not terrible. Therapist is a real slog, as I'm sure everybody is aware. You start off having to find soleil woods, which now you can't craft straight away because you don't have access to the medical center in the hideout anymore, which makes this one a bit more painful. You have to actually go around and find these in medical spawns and loose loot. Sometimes in customs you can find them. And then you go into the gas analyzers, which I normally find in filing cabinets, but this is RNG and can be really, really painful. And then straight into painkiller, which is 4 morphines. So really you just have to hit a lot of med spawns for these quests, but you end up getting blocked pretty early. It's quite painful to do these ones. Next, let's skip down to mechanic quickly. I would try to keep as many barter items as you can because there's lots of things like cigarettes and all sorts of other bits and pieces that he needs for signal and farming and that kind of thing. So you're going to use the tool sets that we found from that barter for farming part 1, which is really quite handy. And otherwise, the gunsmith tasks are probably the ones that are kind of the easiest and most free XP, even though they can be quite complicated. Gunsmith Part 1 requires you to build an MP133, and by far the easiest way to do this is if you go to Mechanic himself, he sells an MP133 that has pretty much all the parts that you need right off the bat. The problem here is that you need to trade it in for 2 elite pliers and a screwdriver. Now, fortunately, he also has a trade for the pliers elite, so you can get these other pliers and nippers that aren't as in hot demand. They spawn more regularly than the elite pliers, so once you have enough elites, then you can go and get this, and you can basically then just complete the quest, because once you have this base, it's very straightforward to finish it. Just go and look on the wiki to find the exact details, but this is really the key to unlocking this quest. For Gunsmith Part 2 with the AK-74U, the real trick to getting this one done is getting the lavatory upgraded enough so that you can make the 60 round mags here using a keck tape and 4 magazines. Once you've done that, the wiki lists using the parts from Peacekeeper Part 2, which is namely the pistol grip, which is this saw style pistol grip, which gives you enough ergonomics. Now this is actually not the way I did it because I didn't have Peacekeeper 2 at the time. And so what I did was I went to Mechanic. There's a barter that he has for the handguard that you need, which is this one. And it costs you 1 green battery and 2 D batteries, so it's actually a fairly expensive barter. Anyway, so now we've got this, and we've got the 60 round magazine. What I used this for was to get the Picatinny rail underneath. I went to Skier, and I grabbed the foregrip that he has, which is the RK6, and from there I needed 1 extra ergonomics, which you can see I've actually got it clicked up already. There's a barter trade that he has at level 1 for DVD and some wires, and this gives you just the 1 extra ergo that you need to just squeak it over and hand it in. So this is a way to do it without having level 2 traders, and this allows you to complete the quest and move on with your life to the next one, which is the MP5 one. And the problem with this is that you really are going to need level 3 traders to make it work, because the MP5 SD and all its components are basically only allowed to buy at Peacekeeper level 2, which is a shame, but at least you can get 1 and 2 completed without moving much further on with the game and get your XP and get yourself further along the progression. Finally, let's talk about Skier a bit. He's a bit of a notorious trader because of supplier, where you have to find TOSs and 3Ms that can block people for a while. And then, of course, what's on the flash drive, where you need to find 2 flash drives for him, which can be a real pain early game. And the fact that this is so early and blocks so many other quests is a real problem, because he also blocks Peacekeeper. As you can see on this quest line, you have to do Friend from the West Part 2 to get to Peacekeeper, and Peacekeeper has a lot of quests. So if you can get through Skier, I managed to finally get through what's on the flash drive early this wipe when I didn't last wipe, and it was really problematic. But once you get through this, you can basically complete Golden Swagon all the way through to Chemical Part 4, which gives you a lot of XP from all these quests and allows you to go down to Friend from the West Part 2, which means that you do need to pay him $6,000, which means that you have to buy $6,000 from Peacekeeper. And although that is quite a lot early wipe, you do kind of need to spend money with Peacekeeper anyway to level him up. So it's not really the end of the world so long as you use that to try and get him from level 1 to level 2. Now, once you've got to Peacekeeper, you can get him all the way through here. There's a lot of these quests that you can do, which don't require too much. You have to drop stuff off or mark things or whatever. And this can give you a lot of free XP and aren't huge blockers until you get later on into his quest line. The final thing that I wanted to mention about Skier is that if you want to do Stirrup, I would recommend doing Stirrup really early. Do it on factory while everyone's still Timmy with pistols, and it makes it an awful lot easier. So I actually had a blast with this. I've never really used the M9 before. I don't do many pistol runs, and this wipe I decided to do a lot more runs with the M9, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So I'm going to show some gameplay of me using the M9 at the end, because honestly I had a much better time than I thought I would, and I managed to complete Stirrup on the very first go, completing it in 1 raid straight away in about 1 minute flat. So I'll show you that, and hopefully you have as much success as I did. If you learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, please as always consider sending a like and a comment, as it helps with visibility for those who haven't found me yet on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter and Twitch to check out when I'm live, which is currently 2 times a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the real-time recording of the Scav Talk podcast, which you can check out the link to in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time in the afternoon. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.